My mother called the check a prop. She stood in the center of the funeral parlor, laughing in that brittle, performing way of hers, warning me not to embarrass myself by trying to cash $20,000. She thought I was gullible enough to hold on to a fake promise. But when I handed that slip of paper to the teller the next morning, I wasn't looking for a payout. I was looking for the truth my grandfather died trying to tell me. The damp cold of Briar Glen always felt less like weather and more like a judgment. It was a seeping gray chill that worked its way under the collar of my coat and settled into the marrow, making everything feel heavy and slow. I stood outside the chapel, watching the town cars pull up on the gravel drive, their tires crunching with a sound that seemed too loud for a funeral. I was 33 years old, standing in shoes that pinched my toes, watching my mother perform the role of the grieving daughter with the precision of a stage actress who had rehearsed this scene for decades. Her name was oblivious to the irony, but her behavior was not. Mom moved through the crowd of mourners in a black dress that was tasteful yet undeniably expensive, accepting condolences with a fragile, tragic smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her grief was brittle, it was sharp, it was a performance designed to solicit pity while maintaining a perimeter of absolute control. I recognized the tension in her jaw from my childhood, that subtle tightening that meant she was calculating who was watching and what they were thinking. I kept my hands in my pockets, fingering the edge of the stiff envelope hidden there. I had not come here to cause a scene. I had come to say goodbye to the only person in this family who had ever looked at me and seen something other than a project or a failure. Grandpa had been the silent anchor in a sea of performative chaos, and now that he was gone, the water felt dangerously high. The service was a blur of floral scents and generic eulogies, delivered by people who knew Grandpa's business reputation but not his laugh. I sat 3 rows back, separated from Mom and my brother, Mark, by a physical and emotional chasm that felt mile-wide. Mark looked bored, checking his watch every 10 minutes, his suit ill-fitting in a way that suggested he had gained weight since the last time he needed to look respectable. After the service, the reception moved to Mom's house. It was a sprawling Victorian on the hill, a house that always smelled of lemon polish and unsaid things. The air was thick with the murmur of low voices and the clinking of silverware against china. I navigated the room like a ghost, grabbing a plate of finger sandwiches I had no intention of eating, just to have something to hold. I found myself cornered in the sunroom, a space filled with ferns and uncomfortable wicker furniture. Mom was holding court near the window, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. Mark was leaning against the doorframe, picking at a loose thread on his cuff. It was the fatigue, I think, or maybe just the overwhelming need to prove that Grandpa and I had shared something real, something that existed outside their narrative of me. When the conversation lulled, and Mom made a comment about how Grandpa had left everything in such disarray, the words slipped out of me before I could check them. "Grandpa left me something," I said quietly. My voice sounded thin in the crowded room. Mom stopped swirling her wine. She turned to me, her eyebrows lifting in a gesture of mild, patronizing surprise. "Oh? And what was that? Eleanor?" I hope it wasn't another box of those old National Geographics he was hoarding. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. No, it was a check. The room seemed to go quiet, though I knew it was just my own perception narrowing down to the 3 of us. Mark looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. "A check?" Mark asked, letting out a short, incredulous laugh. "What, for $50? Did you mow his lawn one last time?" $20,000. I said. The silence that followed was different. It was heavy. Mom stared at me, her eyes darting to the pocket of my coat where my hand was still clenched. Then, the reaction came. It wasn't shock, and it wasn't happiness. It was laughter. She laughed loud and hard, a sound that drew the eyes of the guests in the living room. It was a laugh designed to dismiss, to shrink me down until I was small enough to fit back into the box she kept me in. "Oh, Eleanor," she gasped, wiping a non-existent tear from her eye. "Honey, you cannot be serious. I said, my grip on the envelope tightening. He gave it to me months ago. He told me to wait until after he was gone." She shook her head, her expression shifting from amusement to a kind of pitying annoyance. "That is a prop. Eleanor, it is a sentimental prop. Grandpa was confused at the end. We all know that. He probably wrote that on a napkin or a piece of scratch paper to make you feel better. It is a real check." I insisted, though my voice wavered. "It is drawn on his account." Mom took a step closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Listen to me. Do not embarrass yourself by taking that scrap of paper to the bank. Do you hear me? It will bounce, and you will look desperate. It is a fake, Eleanor, a toy. He was managing your feelings because he knew you were struggling." "I am not struggling," I said, but the defense sounded weak even to my own ears. "I have had the same job for 4 years. Mark chimed in then, pushing off the door frame to join the circle. "Come on, Elle. You are always chasing shortcuts. It is classic you. Always looking for the magic ticket so you do not have to do the heavy lifting. Just let it go. Do not make the tellers laugh at you. Always chasing shortcuts." The accusation landed like a physical blow. I thought about the double shifts I worked at the logistics firm. I thought about the used car I drove because I refused to take a loan from Mom. I thought about the small, quiet life I had built, brick by brick, without their help, precisely so they could never say things like this. And yet, here they were, saying them anyway. I looked at Mom. She was watching me with a look of expectancy, waiting for me to crumble, to agree, to hand the check over so she could dispose of it. "I will not embarrass myself," I said, forcing my face to remain neutral. "Good," Mom said, patting my arm with a hand that felt cold through my sleeve. "Put it in a scrapbook. Honey, that is where fairy tales belong." I left the party 20 minutes later. I sat in my car at the bottom of the driveway, the engine idling, watching the lights of the house blur through the rain on my windshield. I pulled the envelope out of my pocket. It was a standard white envelope, sealed with tape. Inside was the check. I remembered the day Grandpa gave it to me. It was late afternoon, the sun slanting through the blinds of his study in the care facility. He had been lucid that day, sharper than he had been in weeks. He had called me over to his chair, his hand trembling slightly as he reached into the drawer of his side table. He pressed the paper into my palm, his skin dry and papery against mine. His eyes, usually clouded with age and medication, were startlingly clear. "Don't argue with anyone about it," he had whispered, his voice raspy but firm. "Just do what it says." "But Grandpa," I had started to say. He squeezed my hand, silencing me. "Eleanor, listen to me. Do not argue. Do not explain. Just deposit it. Promise me." I had promised. At the time, I thought it was just a kindness, a way for him to feel like he was still taking care of me. I had tucked it away, fully intending to keep it as a keepsake, just as Mom suggested. But the way she had laughed, the way Mark had sneered about shortcuts, ignited a small, cold flame in my chest. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that they were so certain, so absolutely convinced, that my grandfather would play a trick on me. They were certain that I was foolish enough to fall for it. I put the car in gear and drove home, the check sitting on the passenger seat like a passenger. The next morning was a Tuesday. I took a personal hour from work. Telling my manager I had an appointment, the rain had cleared, leaving the sky a bruised pale blue. I drove to the Juniper Valley Community Bank on Main Street. It was the bank Grandpa had used for 40 years. A brick building with columns out front that tried to look imposing but just looked old. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I walked through the double doors. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. I clutched my purse against my side, feeling the outline of the check through the leather. Mom's voice was a loop in my head. "Do not embarrass yourself. It is a prop. You are desperate." I almost turned around. I almost walked out, went to my car, and tore the check into confetti. It would be easier. It would be safe. If I never deposited it, I would never have to know for sure that it was fake. I could keep the fantasy that Grandpa wanted to help me. But then I remembered Mark's face, always chasing shortcuts. I walked up to the counter. The teller was a woman I didn't recognize. Young, with bright acrylic nails and a name tag that read, Tiffany. She looked up at me with a polite, bored expression. "Can I help you?" she asked. I took a breath that shuddered in my lungs. "I need to make a deposit." I pulled the check out. My hand was shaking. I placed it on the marble counter, bracing myself for the look of confusion. I expected her to squint at it. I expected her to call a manager. I expected her to tell me that this account had been closed for years, or that the signature didn't match, or that this was clearly a novelty item. Tiffany picked up the check. She flipped it over. "Did you endorse the back?" she asked, popping her gum. I blinked. Yes. She slid it into the machine. The machine whirred. It made a series of mechanical clicking sounds that echoed like gunshots in the quiet lobby. I held my breath, waiting for the red light. The beep, the rejection. Tiffany typed something on her keyboard. She waited. Then she reached for a receipt printer. "Do you want cash back?" she asked. I stared at her. The world felt like it had tilted 5 degrees to the left. "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "Just the deposit." "Okay. It will take a few days to clear since it is a personal check over $5,000, she said, tearing off the receipt. "Your available balance is printed at the bottom. Have a nice day." I took the receipt. I looked at it. It showed my previous balance, $342, and the pending transaction, $20,000. I walked out of the bank feeling like I was floating. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was disorientation. The teller hadn't laughed. She hadn't called security. She had treated it like an ordinary piece of paper. I went to work. I sat at my desk and stared at spreadsheets. But my mind was back in that lobby. I kept checking my banking app, half expecting the transaction to disappear. For a phone call to come from the bank telling me there had been a terrible mistake. The call didn't come from the bank. It came from Mom. It was 7 in the evening. I was heating up leftover soup in my small apartment kitchen. The phone buzzed on the counter, and when I saw her name, my stomach clenched. "Hi, Mom," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Eleanor, honey, how are you holding up?" Her voice was syrup, thick and sweet. It was the voice she used when she wanted information. "I was just worried about you after yesterday. You seemed so agitated." "I am fine. Mom, just tired." "Of course you are. It has been such a stressful week. Listen, I was thinking about what you said, about the check." I stirred my soup, watching the steam rise. "What about it?" "Well, I just wanted to make sure you didn't do anything stupid," she said, the syrup thinning slightly. "You didn't actually try to take that to the bank, did you? I mean, I would hate for you to have to deal with the fees when it bounces." I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch out between us. "Eleanor?" she said, her tone sharpening. "I went to the bank this morning," I said. The silence on her end was instantaneous and total. Then, a sharp intake of breath. "And?" she demanded. The sweetness was gone now. Her voice was brittle again. "What happened? Did they laugh at you? Did they confiscate it?" "They took it," I said. "I deposited it." "You what?" Her voice rose an octave. "You actually deposited it? Eleanor, are you out of your mind? That account is probably closed. You are going to trigger a fraud alert. You are going to get yourself in legal trouble over a prank." "Grandpa didn't play pranks," I said quietly. "You don't know what he was like at the end. You weren't there every day like I was. You were off living your life while I was dealing with the doctors and the lawyers." She was shouting now. "Why can't you just listen to me for once? Why do you always have to be so difficult?" "I am not being difficult, Mom. I am just doing what he asked." "You need to call them," she said, her voice trembling with something that sounded like panic. "You need to call the bank tomorrow morning and tell them to cancel the transaction. Tell them it was a mistake. I am not going to do that. Eleanor, listen to me. I have to go. Mom, my soup is burning." I hung up. I put the phone face down on the counter. My hands were shaking again. She wasn't worried about my dignity. She wasn't worried about overdraft fees. She was terrified. For the next 2 days, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I checked my bank account every hour. The $20,000 sat in pending, a gray number that felt provisional, like a ghost that hadn't quite decided to manifest. The shame spiral began on the second night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the doubts crept in. Mom was right. She had to be right. Why would Grandpa leave me $20,000? He had never given me money like that before. He knew I was the independent one. Maybe he was confused. Maybe I had just committed a crime. Maybe the police were going to show up at my door. I imagined the phone call. Ms. Ross, this check is a forgery. Your grandfather's account has been empty for years. I imagined Mark's face when he found out. I told you so, always looking for shortcuts. I felt sick. I wanted to call the bank and stop it. I wanted to erase the last 48 hours. But then I remembered Grandpa's hand on mine. Don't argue. Just do what it says. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call my best friend, Sarah. I didn't text Mark. I just waited, holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. On Thursday morning, it dropped. I was sitting at my desk at work, sipping lukewarm coffee, when my phone buzzed, a notification from the bank app. Deposit posted, $20,000. I stared at the screen. The numbers were black. They were solid. They were real. The pending tag was gone. My balance was $20,342. I felt a rush of adrenaline so intense it made me dizzy. It wasn't fake. It wasn't a prop. It was real money. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. The number was local, but not one I recognized. I answered it, my heart pounding. Hello? Ms. Eleanor Ross? The voice was male, deep, and incredibly calm. It sounded like the voice of a man who owned a mahogany desk. Yes, this is she, Ms. Ross. My name is Arthur Penhaligon. I am an attorney with Hollow Wren Estate Services. I am contacting you regarding a transaction that cleared this morning on an account belonging to the late Silas Ross. My stomach dropped. This was it. This was the fraud alert. Am I in trouble? I asked, my voice small. There was a pause. No. Ms. Ross, you are not in trouble. However, the clearing of that check has triggered a specific set of instructions left by your grandfather. I have a time-sensitive delivery for you. I need to confirm your current home address to ensure it reaches you personally this evening. A delivery? I asked. What kind of delivery? A correspondence, he said, and a notification of a meeting. Is the address on file? 42 Cedar Street, apartment 4B, still correct? Yes, I said, that is correct. Thank you. The courier will be there between 6 and 7 this evening. Please ensure you are home to sign for it. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I left work early. I couldn't focus. The world had shifted again. Grandpa had left instructions? Triggers? It sounded like something out of a spy novel, not the life of a retired hardware store owner from Briar Glen. I drove home, my mind racing. What was in the delivery? Why a lawyer? And why hadn't Mom known about this? She handled the estate. She was the executor. She claimed to know every detail of Grandpa's finances. I pulled up to my apartment building just after 5. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the brick facade. I parked my car and grabbed my bag, heading for the entrance. Then I saw her. Mom was standing by the front door of my building. She was wearing a trench coat, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was pacing back and forth, her heels clicking on the pavement. She never came to my apartment. She hated the part of town I lived in. She called it transitional. I slowed my steps. The adrenaline from the morning turned into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. She knew. Somehow, she knew. "Eleanor!" she called out as soon as she saw me. She rushed forward, abandoning her usual poise. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and frantic. "Mom, what are you doing here? I have been calling you for an hour. Why didn't you pick up?" My phone was on silent. I lied. "What is wrong?" "I need that check copy," she said, reaching out as if to grab my arm. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She just demanded the paper. What? The carbon copy? Eleanor, the receipt from the bank. You kept it, didn't you? I took a step back. Why do you need the receipt? For the estate records, she snapped. I am the executor. Eleanor, I have to account for every penny. If you deposited that check, I need the documentation immediately so I can file it before the auditors see it. It is for your own safety. If we don't document it correctly, the IRS will come after you for gift tax. I am trying to protect you. Her voice was high and jagged. She was reaching for my purse strap. Give it to me. Eleanor. Now. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the tremor in her hands. I saw the sheen of sweat on her upper lip. I saw the way her eyes were darting around, as if she expected someone to jump out of the bushes. She wasn't trying to protect me from the IRS. She wasn't trying to balance the estate books. The check had cleared. She knew it had cleared, and that terrified her. She wasn't worried the check was fake. She was worried it was real. I pulled my purse tighter against my body. No, I said. She stopped. Her mouth fell open. Excuse me? I said no. Mom, I am not giving you the receipt. It is my receipt. Eleanor Ross, do not be a child. Give me the paper. I took another step back toward the safety of the glass door. No, if you need documentation, you can ask the bank, or you can ask the lawyers. Her face went slack. What lawyers? Hollow Wren. I said, they called me today. The color drained from her face completely. She looked like she had been slapped. Her hand dropped to her side. Hollow Wren? She whispered. Grandpa didn't use Hollow Wren. He used the firm on Main Street. Apparently not. I said, I turned my back on her. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to apologize, to hand over the paper, to fix the look of horror on her face, but I didn't. I keyed into the building and walked through the door. I didn't look back. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my legs shaking so hard I could barely stand. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. I was alone. The check was real, and my family was afraid. I sat there in the dark, waiting for the courier, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the disappointment. I felt like the danger. The courier arrived at 6:45. He was a bike messenger with a helmet tucked under his arm and a clipboard that seemed to demand official attention. When I opened the door, he didn't smile. He just asked for my ID, checked it against the paperwork, and handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax tape. It felt heavy in my hands, not just with paper, but with gravity. I took it into my kitchen and set it on the table. The silence of the apartment felt different now. It was no longer the silence of solitude. It was the silence of holding your breath. I sat down and slit the envelope open with a paring knife. Inside, there was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery and a smaller sealed legal envelope. I unfolded the stationery first. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was jagged, forceful, and pressed hard into the paper. Grandpa's hand. But from years ago. Before the tremors set in, the date at the top was from 4 years prior. Eleanor, it began. If you are reading this, you did the one thing the rest of them would never believe you could do. You trusted me more than you feared their judgment. The check was not a gift. It was a key. I call it the 20,000 key. By depositing it, you have unlocked a door I closed a long time ago. You have also, I am certain, made yourself a target. They will tell you it is fake. Then they will tell you it is stolen. Then they will tell you that you are sick. Do not listen. Do not argue. Do not sign anything they give you. From this moment forward, I need you to be a clerk. Keep a record of every conversation. Write down dates, times, and tones of voice, if they call. Let it go to voicemail so you have the audio. If they show up, write down what they say immediately after they leave. You have an appointment, 10 days from the date of the deposit, at 10 in the morning. Go to the office of Lydia Vance at the Mediation Center on 4th Street. A representative from the bank will be there. Do not bring your mother. Do not bring your brother. If you bring them, the meeting is canceled. and the door locks again forever. Be brave. Elle, you are the only one who is steady enough to hold the weight of what comes next. Love. Grandpa. I read the letter 3 times. The paper shook in my hands. The 20,000 key. It wasn't money. It was a mechanism. He had gamified his own estate, turning a simple banking transaction into a tripwire. I looked at the date again. 4 years ago, he had planned this while he was still driving, still working in the garden, still hosting Sunday dinners where Mom would fuss over his collar and Mark would ask for loans he never paid back. Grandpa had sat there, eating roast chicken, knowing he had a grenade in his pocket, waiting for the day he died to pull the pin, and he had handed that grenade to me. I slept fitfully that night, waking up at odd hours to check the locks on my door. The next morning, I called the number for Hollow Wren Estate Services. A receptionist put me through to Arthur Penhaligon immediately. "Ms. Ross," he said. His voice was just as mahogany rich as it had been the day before. "I trust the package arrived?" "It did." I said. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot at work, shielding the phone with my hand. "Mr. Penhaligon, I don't understand. What is this meeting?" "It is a disclosure meeting," he said. "The check you deposited is linked to a specific financial instrument. We refer to it as a dormant trust with a conditional activation clause. Essentially, the account was asleep. The check woke it up." "But why me?" I asked. "Because you were the payee," he said simply. "The account was structured to respond only to a completed transaction from a specific list of authorized recipients. Your grandfather issued several such instruments to different family members over the years. Yours is the first, and only, one to successfully clear." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. Several instruments. That meant Mom had one, Mark had one. "What happened to the others?" I asked. "They were never presented for payment," he said. "Or perhaps they were discarded. That is not for me to say. I need to know what is in the account." I said, "I cannot discuss the particulars over the phone. Ms. Ross, privacy protocols are extremely strict, especially given the history associated with this file." "History? I can confirm that you are authorized to receive a full accounting," he said, sidestepping my question. "But you must be physically present. I must warn you. Ms. Ross, we have had inquiries from other parties regarding your grandfather's assets this morning. My mother, I guessed. I cannot name the callers," he said, but the tone was aggressive. "They are claiming there has been an administrative error. They are claiming the check was stolen. We have informed them that the matter is under review and have refused further information, but they will not stop with us." "I understand." I said, "Hold fast. Ms. Ross," he said, "the truth is patient." I hung up and stared at the dashboard. The truth is patient. It was a lawyer's way of saying, "Get your armor on." I went into work, but I was useless. I was a logistics coordinator. My job was to move boxes from point A to point B, but my mind was moving through time. I kept thinking about the history Penhaligon mentioned. On my lunch break, I didn't eat. Instead, I logged into my personal laptop and pulled up my credit reports. I hadn't looked at them in years. I had always been careful, paying my bills on time, carrying low balances, so I assumed everything was fine. But Grandpa's letter had mentioned records, and Penhaligon had mentioned history. I downloaded the full reports from all 3 bureaus. I started scrolling. At first, it looked normal. My student loans, my car payment, my credit card. But then I started looking at the inquiry logs, the list of companies that had pulled my credit file. There were hard inquiries from 5 years ago for a car loan I never applied for. The status read, "Denied, insufficient income." There was a credit card opened in my name 6 years ago, used for 3 months, maxed out, and then paid off in a single lump sum before being closed. The address listed on that account wasn't my apartment. It was a P.O. box in a town 3 towns over. I scrolled further back. 7 years ago, a utility bill for a property I had never lived in. It went to collections and was paid off a month later. I felt sick. I had always assumed the random rejection letters I got in the mail for credit cards were just junk mail spam. I assumed the fluctuations in my credit score were just the mysterious algorithms of the banking world. I had called it adult life mess. I had brushed it off because I didn't want to deal with it, but looking at it now, in the cold light of the screen, it wasn't a mess, it was a pattern. Every time my credit score dipped, it coincided with a time Mom had complained about money. The car loan inquiry? That was the year Mark totaled his truck and needed a new one. The utility bill? That was the year Mom rented that studio space for her art consulting business that never launched. They hadn't just painted me as financially unstable. They had been using my name to secure the loans that kept them afloat, and then hiding the evidence. I closed the laptop. My hands were trembling. I felt violated. It wasn't just about money, it was about identity. They had worn my name like a costume whenever they needed to walk into a bank and ask for something they didn't deserve. I needed to go to the bank, not to deposit anything, but to see the face of the person who was handling this. I left work early again. I drove to the Juniper Valley Community Bank. This time, I didn't go to the teller line. I asked to see the branch manager. I was directed to a glass-walled office in the back. The nameplate on the door read, Sarah Vance, Senior Account Manager. She wasn't the mediator mentioned in the letter, but the surname was the same as the contact Grandpa had listed. Perhaps a relative, or perhaps the letter used a pseudonym for the firm. The woman inside was in her 50s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses that hung on a chain. She looked up as I entered, and her expression shifted from professional detachment to keen interest. "Ms. Ross?" she asked. "I saw you come in. Please, sit down." She closed the door and clicked the lock. It was a small sound, but it made the room feel like a bunker. "You know who I am?" I asked. "I know the alert that popped up on my screen yesterday morning," she said. She sat behind her desk, folding her hands. "We don't see many of those. In fact, in my 20 years here, I have seen exactly 2, both on accounts held by your grandfather." "2?" I asked. "One was 10 years ago." She said, "It was resolved quietly. The second was yours." She turned her monitor so I couldn't see it, but she typed a few keys. "Ms. Ross, I want to confirm something for you, because I suspect you are receiving conflicting information. The check you deposited was valid. The signature was verified. The funds were available. My mother says it was a fake." I said. "She says Grandpa was confused." Silas Ross was many things. "Ms. Vance said, a small, wry smile touching her lips. Confused was not one of them. "He came in here 6 months ago to update the signature card and the instruction protocol. He sat exactly where you are sitting. He was very specific. What did he say?" "He said that he was leaving breadcrumbs," she said, "and that he wanted to see who was hungry enough to follow them." She leaned forward. "When that check cleared, it triggered a lock and notify status. It means that no one, not even the executor of the estate, can access the transaction history or the balance of that specific sub-account until the beneficiary meeting takes place. That is why Mom is panicking." I realized aloud. She is locked out. "Ms. Vance didn't confirm or deny. She just looked at me over her glasses. "I can tell you that we have had several aggressive calls from a woman claiming to be you, trying to reset the password." "Me?" I asked, horrified. "We have strict voice authentication protocols," Ms. Vance said calmly. "The caller failed them. We also have a flag note on your file to require photo ID for any in-person requests. Your grandfather anticipated this. He knew." I whispered, "He knew." She agreed. "Ms. Ross, I am not a lawyer, and I cannot give you legal advice. But as your banker, I will tell you this. Keep your copy of that deposit receipt. Do not lose it, and do not sign any documents that the estate executor presents to you until after our meeting next week." "I won't. I promised." I walked out of the bank feeling heavier than when I went in. The validation was a relief, but the scope of the deception was terrifying. Mom wasn't just lying to me. She was impersonating me. She was committing felonies over the phone while probably sipping her morning coffee. I got back to my apartment and my phone lit up. It was a text from Mark. "Check your email." It read, "Mom is really worried. L. She says you are having an episode. Just talk to us." I felt a flash of anger so hot it burned my throat. An episode. That was their favorite weapon. If I disagreed, I was difficult. If I fought back, I was emotional. If I discovered the truth, I was having an episode. I opened the group chat. Ross Family Connect. A thread I usually kept muted. It was active. Mark had posted a screenshot of a text I had supposedly sent him, demanding money. I stared at it. I had never sent that text. "I need $5,000 now or I'm going to the police." The fake text read, below it, Mom had replied, "Oh, honey, we want to help you, but you have to stop this. You are scaring us." Mark. "Eleanor, just come home. We can figure this out. The bank knows you are sick." Mom talked to them. They were building a paper trail. They were creating a narrative of instability in real time, just in case I tried to use the evidence I had found. If I showed up with proof of fraud, they would say, "Look, she is paranoid. She has been sending crazy threats. She is hallucinating. It was brilliant. It was evil. And it was working." I could feel the doubt creeping in at the edges of my mind. Did I send that? No. Am I crazy? No. I needed to anchor myself. I needed facts. I went back to my laptop. I searched my email archives. I searched for consent. Form. Sign. I waded through hundreds of emails, holiday plans, potluck coordination, passive-aggressive notes about birthday gifts. Then I found it. An email from Mom, dated 6 years ago. The subject line was, "Just a formality." "Hi, sweetie." The email read, "Grandpa's accountant needs to update some boring tax stuff for the family trust. Since you are a beneficiary, lucky you, we need a quick signature to keep you on the insurance policy." I attached the page. "Just sign the bottom and scan it back to me. ASAP. Love you." Attached was a PDF. It was a single page, blurry, looking like it had been photocopied 10 times. It was titled, "Beneficiary Authorization and Release." The text was dense legalese, almost unreadable, but at the bottom, there was a signature line. I had signed it. I remembered signing it. I was 27, busy, and trusting. I had signed it on my lunch break and emailed it back within 10 minutes. I downloaded the PDF and zoomed in on the text. The resolution was terrible, but I could make out a few phrases. Power of attorney, limited scope, financial representation. It wasn't an insurance form. It was a limited power of attorney. I had literally signed over the right for her to act in my name for family trust matters. But the credit cards weren't trust matters. The car loan wasn't a trust matter. She had used a broad, vague consent form to justify specific, personal fraud. I printed the email. I printed the attachment. I put them in a fresh manila folder. I wrote evidence on the tab in black marker. Then I started a log. Log entry 1, January 22nd, 7:30 p.m. Received letter from Grandpa confirming the check is a key. Confirmed with Estate Attorney Penhaligon that the account is dormant and locked. Confirmed with Banker Vance that Mom tried to reset my password by impersonating me. Found email from Mom dated 2019 where she tricked me into signing a power of attorney. Mark is falsifying text messages in the group chat to make me look unstable. Writing it down helped. It took the chaos out of my head and put it on paper where it couldn't move. But I couldn't do this alone. I was one person against a lifetime of conditioning. I needed a witness who wasn't on their payroll. I picked up my phone and called Sarah. Sarah had been my roommate in college. She was a nurse. Pragmatic, unflappable, and completely immune to my family's charm. She knew Mom was intense, but she didn't know the half of it. "Hey, stranger." She picked up on the second ring. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Sarah," I said. My voice was steady, but only barely. "I need you to come over. And I need you to leave your phone in your car." There was a pause. "Eleanor? Are you okay?" "No," I said. "I am not okay. But I am not having an episode. I have paper. I have proof. I am on my way," she said. When Sarah arrived, she looked at the folder on my table. She looked at the check receipt taped to my refrigerator. She looked at my face. She sat down and listened for an hour. She read the letter from Grandpa. She looked at the credit report. She read the fake texts Mark had posted. When I was done, she didn't offer me a tissue. She didn't hug me. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and looked at the wall with a cold, hard expression I had never seen before. "So," she said, "they have been farming you." "Farming me?" "Like a crop. Eleanor, they grow your credit score, harvest it when they need a loan, let it fallow when it crashes, and then plant again. They have been using you as a renewable resource." The words hit me like a physical blow. Farming me. It was so grotesque and so accurate. "And now," she continued, looking at me, "the crop has stood up and walked away, and they are terrified because the harvest is over." "What do I do?" I asked. "I have to meet this mediator in 10 days. "You go to the meeting," she said, "but you don't go alone. You can't bring family." The letter said, "But it didn't say you couldn't bring a friend. It said no mom, no Mark." "Exactly. I am coming with you." She reached for the folder. "And until then, we are going to build a timeline that is so watertight they will drown in it." She pulled a notepad out of her purse. "Start talking," she said. "I want every date, every weird comment, every time your mother suddenly had money for a vacation right after you got rejected for a credit card. We are going to map it all out." I looked at Sarah, then at the folder, then at the letter from Grandpa, for the first time since the funeral. I didn't feel shame. I felt a cold, quiet clarity. Grandpa had left me a key. But he had also left me a test. He wanted to know if I was strong enough to use it. I picked up the pen. "Okay," I said, "let's start with the kitchen remodel in 2018. As we worked, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. "Eleanor, please, I found an old letter from Grandpa that explains everything. It was all a misunderstanding. I'm coming over to bring it to you. Stay there." I showed the phone to Sarah. "She is lying," Sarah said. "She doesn't have a letter. She wants to get into your apartment to find yours." "I know," I said. I typed a reply. "I am not home. Leave it in the mailbox." I wasn't home. Not the home she thought she knew. I had moved into a new place, a place made of facts and boundaries, and she didn't have the key to this one. I turned the phone off. "Next," I said to Sarah, "let's look at the student loans." We worked until midnight. Outside, the wind howled through the streets of Briar Glen. But inside, under the pool of light at the kitchen table, the silence was finally mine. The office of Hollow Wren Estate Services was not designed to make people feel comfortable. It was designed to make them feel small. The walls were lined with dark walnut paneling that absorbed the light, and the carpet was so thick it silenced footsteps completely, as if the room itself was swallowing the evidence of our presence. I sat in a leather chair that was slightly too large for me. Clutching my purse in my lap, Sarah had offered to come, but Mr. Penhaligon had been specific. This initial review was for the beneficiary only. Arthur Penhaligon sat across from me. He was a man of precise movements. He didn't just open a file. He surgically revealed it. He placed a heavy binder on the desk between us, aligned it with the edge of the blotter, and then looked at me. "Ms. Ross," he began, his voice low and devoid of theatricality. "Before we proceed to the figures, I must explain the nature of the instrument your grandfather created. Silas Ross was a man who believed in testing the structural integrity of things, bridges, foundations, and, it seems, people." He opened the binder. "The account in question is a dormant trust. It was funded 15 years ago with the proceeds from the sale of a commercial property your grandfather owned in the next county. He never merged these funds with his general estate. He kept them separate, in what he called an observation silo." I leaned forward, trying to read the upside-down numbers. Observation silo? It was a monitoring tool. Penhaligon said he wanted to see how his family handled money when they thought he wasn't looking. Over the years, he distributed what he called keys, small checks, promissory notes, access codes. He gave them to your mother. He gave them to your brother. He gave them to 2 cousins living in Ohio. And? I asked. And they were all used immediately. He said, or they were used inappropriately. Your brother attempted to cash a conditional bond 3 years before it matured because he wanted to buy a boat. Your mother attempted to leverage a restricted access code to secure a line of credit for a business venture that did not exist. He paused, letting that sink in. Each time a key was misused, the main account locked down further. It became harder to access. The scrutiny increased. Your grandfather was measuring patience. He was measuring entitlement. And my check? I asked. Yours was the final key. Penhaligon said. He issued it to you 6 months ago. The instruction was simple. If Eleanor deposits this without asking for more, and if the deposit clears without a family member intervening to stop it, the silo opens. But they did try to stop it. I said, Mom told me it was a prop. Verbal interference does not count. Penhaligon said, legal interference does. If your mother had filed an injunction to stop the check, the account would have dissolved into a charitable remainder trust, and no one would have received a dime. By letting you deposit it, even while mocking you, she inadvertently unlocked the door she has been trying to pick for a decade. He turned the binder around so I could face it. This is the current standing of the account. I looked at the bottom line. I blinked. I had expected maybe $50,000, maybe $100,000. The number was $340,000. But that wasn't what made my breath hitch. It was the transaction log above the balance. It was a list of withdrawals, dating back 12 years. They were all listed as authorized reimbursements. I ran my finger down the list. August 2014. Reimbursement. Eleanor Ross. Tuition support. $5,000. March 2015. Reimbursement. Eleanor Ross. Medical assistance. $3,000. June 2016. Reimbursement. Eleanor Ross. Rent stabilization. $2,000. September 2018. Reimbursement. Eleanor Ross. Vehicle repair. $4,000. The list went on. Pages of it. I looked up at Penhaligon. My voice felt incredibly far away. I never received any of this money. I paid my own tuition. I said, my voice gaining a little strength. I took out loans. I am still paying them. I paid for my appendectomy on a credit card. I have never asked for rent money, not once. Penhaligon nodded slowly. He didn't look surprised. We suspected as much. He said, these withdrawals were requested by the family manager, your mother, on your behalf. She submitted documentation claiming she had provided you with financial support and was seeking reimbursement from the trust. She paid herself. I whispered, she used my life as an invoice. Every time I had a crisis, a flat tire, a medical bill, a tuition hike, I had complained to Mom about it. I had vented, looking for sympathy. And she had taken that information, turned around, and billed Grandpa for it. She had cashed in on my struggles. Can I see the documentation? I asked. Penhaligon slid a separate folder across the desk. Copies. I opened it. There were emails from Mom to Grandpa's old accountant. Eleanor is in such a bind. Dad, I had to write her a check for rent again. It is draining my savings. Can we release some funds to cover me? She is just so bad with money. And there were forms. Beneficiary acknowledgement of receipt. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the form. It read, Eleanor Ross. It was a good forgery. It had the loop on the R that I used, but the slant was wrong. It leaned backward, just slightly. My handwriting leans forward. She forged my signature. I said, the realization was cold and absolute. She committed fraud. Penhaligon adjusted his cuffs. That is a legal conclusion. Ms. Ross, but it is one that the evidence strongly supports. And it brings us to the incident this morning. Incident? At 9:15 this morning, my receptionist received a call. The caller identified herself as Eleanor Ross. She had your social security number. She had your mother's maiden name. She requested a full wire transfer of the available balance to an account at a different bank. I felt the blood drain from my face. The receptionist is trained to listen for stress markers. Penhaligon continued. And more importantly, we have a voice print on file from our call yesterday. The caller was not you. When the receptionist asked for the answering phrase, a security question your grandfather set up, the caller became abusive and hung up. It was her. I said. Penhaligon nodded. We have logged the attempt as a security breach. This is why the family is afraid. Ms. Ross, they are not afraid of you getting $20,000. They are afraid of the ledger. They are afraid that if you see this, he tapped the binder, you will realize that the narrative of your financial incompetence was manufactured. It was a cover. I said, if they told everyone I was bad with money, then no one would question why Grandpa had to keep sending reimbursements for me. Precisely. You were the perfect alibi. I closed the folder. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. It wasn't peace. It was the calm of a soldier who finally understands the layout of the battlefield. All my life, I had felt a vague sense of guilt, a feeling that I was somehow failing to launch, that I was a burden. Mom had nurtured that guilt. She had watered it, because as long as I felt guilty, I wouldn't look at the books. I need copies of all of this. I said, we have prepared a digital drive for you. Penhaligon said, and hard copies. Ms. Ross, I must warn you, the meeting with the mediator is in 7 days. Between now and then, the pressure will increase. Your mother knows she failed the security check this morning. She knows the wall is coming down. Let it come down. I said. I left the office with the heavy binder under my arm. The sun was shining outside, bright and harsh. I walked to my car, put the binder in the trunk, and locked it. I needed coffee. I needed to sit somewhere that smelled like normal life, somewhere that didn't smell like old paper and betrayal. I drove to a coffee shop on the edge of town, a place called The Grind. It was neutral territory. I ordered a black coffee and sat in a booth in the back, watching the door. I shouldn't have been surprised when Mark walked in 20 minutes later. I hadn't told him where I was, but Briar Glen is small, and my car is distinctive. A beat-up red Honda that Mom hated because it lowered the property value when I parked in her driveway. Mark spotted me instantly. He didn't wave. He just walked over, his shoulders hunched in his suede jacket, looking like a man who was walking into a headwind. He slid into the booth opposite me. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he hadn't shaved in a few days. Tracking me? I asked, taking a sip of coffee. I saw your car, he said. He didn't order anything. He just put his hands on the table, clasping them together until his knuckles turned white. Elle, we need to talk. We are talking, I said. Not like this. Not with lawyers and frozen accounts. Mom is a wreck. She has barely slept in 3 days. She thinks you are going to send her to jail. I looked at him. Is there a reason she should go to jail? Mark? He flinched. Don't do that. Don't use that lawyer voice on me. We are family. Look, I know you are mad. I get it. Grandpa played a mind game with that check. And it worked. You proved your point. You are independent. We get it. I said nothing. I just watched him. But you have to be reasonable, he said, leaning in. $300,000. Elle, that is what she says is in there. Do you have any idea what that could do for us? For the whole family? For us? I asked. Or for you? For everyone. He looked around to make sure no one was listening. Look, I am in a hole. Elle, a bad one. The business loans. The rates adjusted. I am underwater. If I don't come up with 50 grand by next month, I am going to lose the house. Sheila doesn't know. If she finds out, she will leave me. I felt a flicker of the old instinct, the urge to fix it, the urge to be the big sister. Even though I was 2 years younger, poor Mark, he just needs a hand. But then I thought about the binder in my trunk. I thought about the entry from 2018, vehicle repair, $4,000. Mark had bought a new truck in 2018. Mark, I said quietly, did you know about the reimbursements? He froze. His eyes shifted away from mine, focusing on a stain on the table. What reimbursements? He mumbled. The ones Mom filed in my name, I said. The tuition, the medical bills, the money she said I needed, which she then funneled to... Where? To you?" He didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. He pulled his hands off the table and wiped them on his jeans. "She was just trying to balance things out," he said, his voice sullen now. "You didn't have a family to support. You didn't have a mortgage. You were single. You could live on nothing. I had responsibilities. Grandpa wouldn't give me the money directly because he didn't like my business plan. So Mom, she improvised. She improvised." I repeated. "She stole my identity to launder money to you because Grandpa didn't trust you." "It wasn't stealing," he hissed. "It was family money. It was going to come to us eventually anyway. She just advanced it. And now you are acting like you are some kind of victim because you didn't get your share of the spoil fast enough." I stared at him. The mask had slipped completely. There was no concern for my episode here. There was no worry about my mental health. There was just the raw, ugly entitlement of a man who believed the world owed him a living, and that I existed solely to subsidize it. He wasn't protecting Mom. He was protecting his accomplice. "I am not splitting the money." "Mark," I said. He looked at me with genuine hate. "Then what are you going to do? Keep it all? You think you deserve it?" "I think," I said, standing up, "that I deserve to know the truth, and I think Grandpa knew exactly who you were. That is why he skipped you." I threw $5 on the table for the coffee I hadn't finished. "If you are in debt, Mark, I suggest you sell the truck, the one you bought with my medical reimbursement." I walked out of the coffee shop. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a strange, sorrowful finality. I had lost my brother. Or rather, I had realized I never really had one. I had a dependent who resented his host. I drove back to my apartment. I felt scraped hollow. It is a specific kind of grief. Mourning people who are still alive. It is harder, I think, because they keep walking around, wearing the faces of the people you loved, but there is nothing behind the eyes but calculation. I locked the door, verified the deadbolt, and sat on my floor with the binder and the rest of Grandpa's letter. I hadn't read the end of it the night before. I had been too afraid. I unfolded the paper. "Eleanor, I know what you are finding. I know about the reimbursements. I caught your mother doing it 3 years ago. I should have stopped it then. I should have prosecuted. But I was old, and I was cowardly, and I didn't want to spend my final years in a courtroom testifying against my own daughter. So I did the only thing I could. I shut off the tap, I locked the accounts, and I wrote the instructions for this trust. I know they made you feel small. Elle, I know they treated you like the family screw-up. It was necessary for them. They needed a place to put their own failures, so they poured them into you. You were the shock absorber. Every time Mark made a mistake, every time your mother overspent, they blamed it on your needs, your instability. They absorbed the shock of their own incompetence by using your reputation as a cushion. I am sorry I let them do it. I am sorry I didn't tell you while I was alive. I wanted to leave you money, yes, but more than that, I wanted to leave you the evidence. Money can be spent. The truth is durable. When you go to that meeting, you will have a choice. You can settle. You can give them what they want to make the noise stop. Or you can let the shock absorber fail. You can let them feel the impact of their own lives. Choose wisely. Grandpa. I put the letter down. Tears were running down my face, hot and fast. The shock absorber. It explained everything. The constant criticism. The way Mom would sigh and say, "Eleanor is just going through a phase," whenever I got a promotion or accomplished something good. They couldn't afford for me to be successful. If I was successful, I didn't need help. And if I didn't need help, they couldn't create the fake reimbursements. My success was a threat to their income stream. I had spent my whole life trying to prove to them that I was good, that I was steady, that I was worthy of their respect. I had worked double shifts. I had driven old cars. I had eaten ramen noodles so I wouldn't have to ask for a loan. I had tried so hard to be the good daughter, and all the while, my striving was the very thing that endangered their grift. I wiped my face. The sorrow was still there, but it was changing. It was hardening. It was cooling into something like steel. I wasn't seeking their approval anymore. I was done auditioning for a role in a play that was written to humiliate me. I picked up my phone. I had a text from Sarah. "How did it go?" I typed back, "I have the binder, and I saw Mark, and I am done absorbing the shock." I went to my closet and pulled out a box. Inside was a portable safe I used for my passport and birth certificate. I put Grandpa's letter inside. I put the digital drive Mr. Penhaligon had given me inside. I locked it. Then I took the binder and put it in the bottom of my laundry hamper, buried under a pile of dirty towels. It was a cliché hiding spot. But Mom never did laundry. She considered it beneath her. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The sun had set, and the streetlights were humming to life. I knew they would come for me. Mom wouldn't give up. Mark wouldn't give up. They were desperate animals now, cornered by their own greed. They would try to charm me, threaten me, shame me. They would try to break into my apartment. They would try to destroy my reputation at work. Let them try. I went to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. I ate it standing up, staring at the empty chair where Mom had sat years ago, telling me I wasn't smart enough for grad school. Reimbursement. Eleanor Ross. Tuition support. She had billed him for the grad school she told me not to attend. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound in the empty kitchen. I washed the plate. I dried it. I put it away. Then I sat down at my laptop and opened a new document. I titled it Timeline of Theft. I started typing. I transcribed the dates from the binder summaries I had memorized. I cross-referenced them with my own bank statements. I built the map. 10 days. I had to hold the line for 10 days. I wasn't just depositing a check anymore. I was preparing an indictment. The agenda for the meeting arrived on a Tuesday, delivered via secure email with a subject line that read simply, Mediation Protocol, Ross Trust Disclosure. I opened the attachment sitting at my kitchen table. The document was sparse, formal, and terrifying. It listed the time, the location, a conference room at the Briar Glen Mediation Center, and the attendees, Ms. Eleanor Ross, beneficiary, Ms. Lydia Vance, mediator, Mr. Arthur Penhaligon, estate counsel, representative, Juniper Valley Community Bank, and then, below a bold line, interested parties, per S. Ross instructions, Mrs. Caroline Ross, Mr. Mark Ross. I stared at the names. Grandpa had not just invited me to learn the truth, he had invited them to watch me learn it. He had anticipated the conflict. He knew that if I was left alone in a room with a lawyer and a checkbook, my mother would spin a story about how I had misunderstood, how I was stealing, how I was confused. By putting them in the room, strictly as observers, he was forcing them to witness the dismantling of their own narrative. 2 hours after the agenda hit my inbox, my mother called. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Her voice was warm, pitched in that low, intimate register she used when she wanted to remind me that we were the only two people in the world who understood each other. "Eleanor," she said, "I made a pot roast, the one with the carrots and the red wine reduction. I want you to come over for dinner. Just the two of us." I hesitated. My instinct was to say no, to lock the door and wait for the meeting. But I needed to see her. I needed to see if the person who had forged my signature on a reimbursement form could look me in the eye and pass the potatoes. "I will be there at 6, I said. The house on the hill looked exactly the same as it had on the day of the funeral, but the air inside felt different. The tension wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy, like a barometer drop before a tornado. Mom met me at the door wearing an apron, her hair perfectly coiffed. She hugged me, and for a second, I let myself lean into it. The smell of her perfume, jasmine and expensive soap, was the smell of my childhood safety. It was hard to reconcile that scent with the forensic timeline I had built in my apartment. We ate in the dining room. She talked about the weather. She talked about the neighbors. She talked about how hard it was to keep up the garden without Grandpa's help. She poured wine. She was charming, attentive, and utterly terrified. I waited. I knew the pivot was coming. It happened over coffee. She set her cup down, sighed, and looked at me with glistening eyes. "I owe you an apology." "Eleanor," she said softly. I watched her. "For what?" "Mom?" "For the funeral. For saying the check was a prop. I was so stressed, losing my father, dealing with the estate, worrying about Mark. I took it out on you. I shouldn't have said you were embarrassing yourself. I know you are responsible. It was a good apology. It hit all the right notes. If I hadn't seen the binder, I might have bought it." "It is okay," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She smiled, a relieved, fragile thing. "I knew you would understand. You have always been the empathetic one. That is why I wanted to talk to you about this meeting next week." Here it was. I took a sip of my coffee. "What about the meeting?" "It is just going to be so ugly. Eleanor, lawyers, bankers, digging through old paperwork. Grandpa was complicated at the end. He moved money around in ways that don't look good on paper, but it was all for the family. If we go into that room and let them open up everything, it is going to cause a lot of unnecessary pain. For me, for Mark." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was cool. "I have an idea," she said, "a way to bypass the drama. I had the family attorney draft a simple settlement statement. It basically says that we agreed to distribute the account funds evenly among the three of us. Right now, without the formal disclosure process, we skip the meeting, we skip the fees, you get a third, Mark gets a third, I get a third. It is fair, it is fast, and we stay a family." She pulled a document from the sideboard. It was already tabbed with little sticky notes where I needed to sign. I looked at the paper. Waiver of full disclosure and release of claims. If I signed this, I wouldn't just be splitting the money. I would be burying the evidence. I would be retroactively approving every forgery, every theft, every lie she had told for the last 10 years. I would be agreeing that the reimbursements were legitimate. I pulled my hand back. "I can't sign that." "Mom?" Her smile faltered. "Just a fraction." "Why not?" "It is $100,000. Eleanor, cash, no questions asked." "Because Grandpa left instructions." I said, "He wanted the meeting. Grandpa is dead," she snapped, the mask slipping for a microsecond before she pulled it back up. "Eleanor, please, do this for me. If you open that Pandora's box, you are going to find things that hurt you, things that make you look bad." "To make me look bad?" I asked. "How?" She lowered her voice. "There are records. Eleanor, times you needed help, times you were unstable. If that comes out in a legal setting, it could follow you. I am trying to protect your reputation." I stared at her. She was doing it again. She was using the very lies she had manufactured to threaten me. She was banking on the fact that I would be too ashamed of her fiction to reveal the truth. "My reputation is fine." I said, "I am going to the meeting." She stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. The warmth drained out of the room instantly. The jasmine perfume suddenly smelled cloying. "You are making a mistake," she said, her voice ice cold. "It is my mistake to make. If you go through with this," she said, leaning over the table, her eyes hard and flat, "you are choosing a ledger over your mother. You are choosing to humiliate us. And if you do that, Eleanor, you will be alone. Mark won't speak to you. I won't speak to you. You will have your little victory, and you will have your money. But you will have no one to call on Christmas. Is that what you want?" The threat hung in the air, abandonment, the primal fear of every child. "Be good, or we will leave you." I stood up. My legs were shaking, just a little, but I forced them to hold me. "I have been alone for a long time. Mom," I said, "I just didn't know how much it cost." I walked out. I didn't look back. I heard the sound of a wine glass shattering against the wall as I closed the front door. I drove home in silence. I didn't cry. The sadness was there, deep and aching, but it was overlaid with a new urgency. She was desperate. The settlement offer was a Hail Mary. She knew what was in those records. I needed to know, too. I spent the next 2 nights doing forensic work. I took the digital files Mr. Penhaligon had given me, the list of support reimbursements, and I laid them out against my own calendar. June 2016. Reimbursement. Eleanor Ross. Rent stabilization. $2,000. I checked my photos from June 2016. I was working at the logistics firm. I was living in a studio apartment. I paid my rent on the 1st, every month. I checked Mom's Facebook timeline. In June 2016, Mom and Mark had gone to Cape Cod for a week. She had posted photos of lobster rolls and a rental cottage with a view of the ocean, so needed this getaway. Family first, February 2018. Reimbursement. Eleanor Ross. Medical assistance, $3,000. February 2018. I had the flu that year. I missed 3 days of work. I didn't go to the hospital. I stayed in bed and drank Gatorade. I checked the timeline. That was the month Mom remodeled the powder room on the 1st floor. I remembered because she had sent me pictures of the imported wallpaper. It was consistent. Every time she claimed the family was struggling to support me, she was actually upgrading her lifestyle. She wasn't just stealing. She was using my failures to fund her luxuries. She had painted me as a burden so she could live like a queen. But there was something else, a gap. There were transfers in the binder that didn't go to Mom's account. They went to a third party, Sterling Associates, payment, debt service/guarantor. E. Ross. I didn't know a Sterling. I didn't have any debt service. I needed more pieces. I needed the source. The next morning, Saturday, I drove to the Briar Glen self-storage facility on the edge of town. Grandpa had kept a unit there for his overflow. Mom had complained about it for years, saying it was full of junk he refused to throw away. She had given me the key after the funeral, telling me to clean it out when I had time. I rolled up the metal door. The air inside was stale and cold, smelling of old cardboard and motor oil. It was filled with boxes of tools, old furniture, and stacks of magazines. But in the back, sitting on an old drafting table, was a metal file box. It was locked, but the key on my ring, the small brass one I had never identified, fit the lock perfectly. Inside were folders, meticulously labeled in Grandpa's jagged hand, tax summaries, deed copies, correspondence, and a black ledger book titled Truth Events. I opened the ledger. It wasn't financial. It was a diary of decisions. March 12th, 2015. Caroline asked for $10,000. Said Eleanor was in trouble with a landlord. Called Eleanor. She was fine. Happy. Denied the request. Caroline angry. March 14th, 2015. Withdrawal from trust B. Caroline used the emergency code. Claimed authorized proxy. I let it go. Monitoring. He had watched them. He had watched them steal from him, and he had written it down. I flipped to the back of the ledger. There was a section header. The Sterling liability. My heart hammered against my ribs. July 2019. Caroline approached Victor Sterling for a private loan, $50,000, high interest. She used the trust as collateral. She listed Eleanor as the guarantor. She told Sterling that Eleanor was the beneficiary of the trust and would cover the debt upon my death. I sat down on a dusty crate. The room spun. She hadn't just stolen from the trust. She had borrowed money from a loan shark, or at least a predatory private lender, and she had signed my name as the person responsible for paying it back. If the trust didn't pay, if the settlement she wanted me to sign didn't go through to cover her tracks, Sterling would come for me. He would have a document, signed by Eleanor Ross, promising repayment. I was the shield. If the debt went bad, I was the one who would be sued. I was the one who would file for bankruptcy. The narrative of me being bad with money wasn't just an excuse for skimming. It was a preemptive defense. If I was known as the financial disaster of the family, no one would be surprised when I defaulted on a $50,000 loan. It was engineered. All of it. I closed the ledger. I put the folders in my bag. I locked the unit. I didn't go home. I drove to the next town over, to a strip mall office with a sign that said Consumer Rights and Identity Defense. I had looked up the lawyer, Ms. Halloway, on my phone in the parking lot, She wasn't an estate lawyer. She was a shark who dealt with fraud. I paid for an hour of her time. I showed her the copies of the reimbursements. I told her about the sterling entry in the ledger. She listened without interrupting. She took notes on a yellow pad. When I was done, she took off her glasses. "Ms. Ross," she said, "you are describing complex identity theft and wire fraud. If this goes to a criminal court, your mother is looking at prison time. Is that your goal?" I looked at my hands. "Is it?" "No," I said. "I don't want to put her in prison. I just want to be free. I want my name off the debt. I want the lies to stop. Then we need to secure your perimeter." "Ms. Holloway said, "First, we freeze everything. Today, we lock your credit files. We put a fraud alert on your banking profile. We send a formal demand letter to this sterling entity requesting proof of debt validation. We do not accuse your mother yet. We simply secure the assets and the identity." She leaned forward. "But you must understand something. When you lock the doors, the people who were stealing from you are going to start banging on the windows. You have to be ready for the escalation." "I am ready," I said. I spent the rest of the weekend following her instructions. I froze my credit at all 3 bureaus. I set up 2-factor authentication on every account I owned. I went to the bank and updated my signature card, adding a requirement that any transaction over $100 required a thumbprint. It felt bureaucratic, but it was deeply emotional. With every click, with every form, I was reclaiming myself. I was taking Eleanor Ross back from them. On Monday night, the banging on the windows began. I was at home, organizing the files for the mediation, when there was a frantic pounding on my door. It wasn't the police. It was Mark. I opened the door, leaving the chain on. Mark looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were bloodshot. He was wearing the same clothes I had seen him in at the coffee shop. Please," he said, his voice cracking. "You have to let me in. We need to talk." I undid the chain. I stepped back. He stumbled into my living room. He didn't look at the furniture. He looked at me with a mix of terror and pleading. "Mom says you aren't signing the settlement," he said. "She says you are going to the meeting." "I am." I said. "You can't," Mark said. He grabbed my arm. You can't. If you go to that meeting, if they release the transaction history, Sheila is going to leave me." Sheila was his wife. They had 2 kids. "Why would Sheila leave you because of Mom's accounting?" I asked. "It is not just Mom," he cried. "It is me. The transfers. They weren't just for Mom. Some of them were for me." I stood very still. I knew this. But hearing him say it was different. I know. "Mark, the truck." It wasn't just the truck. He was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "It was the gambling. Okay? I got into some trouble a few years ago. Online poker. It got out of hand. I lost 10 grand. Then 20. I didn't have it. Mom bailed me out. She used the trust. She said it was early inheritance. She said Grandpa wouldn't mind because it was all staying in the family anyway." He stopped and looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "She told me she marked it as advances. She didn't tell me she marked it as your expenses. I didn't know she was using your name until last week. I swear, I looked at him. I believed him." Actually, Mark was selfish. But he wasn't calculating enough to engineer the paperwork. He was just the open mouth that Mom kept feeding. "But if Sheila sees the records," he whispered, "if she sees $50,000 in withdrawals for debt settlement that went to gambling sites, she will take the kids. She will destroy me. You have to sign the waiver. Please, just take the money and let us bury the rest." I felt a surge of pity. It would be so easy to save him. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper. I could be the big sister. I could be the shock absorber one last time. My heart was breaking for him, for the family we could have been. But the conflict inside me was settling. I didn't want to hurt them. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to see them in handcuffs. But I realized that protecting them required sacrificing myself. It required me to agree to be the failure. It required me to carry a debt I didn't create. I wouldn't do it. There had to be a third path, not the silence of the victim, and not the scorched earth of the Avenger. I went to my desk. I pulled out a fresh notepad. I wrote down the agenda for the meeting. Goal, clarity. Goal, exoneration. Goal, safety. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't demand they go to jail. I would simply walk into that room, place the truth on the table, and refuse to pick it up when they dropped it. I would draw a boundary line in ink, and I would stand behind it. Grandpa had given me the key, but he hadn't just given me access to an account. He had given me permission to stop saving them. The meeting was in 2 days. I checked the lock on my door. I checked the fraud alert on my phone. I was ready. The conference room at the Briar Glen Mediation Center was painted a color that could only be described as aggressive beige. It was a hue designed to lower heart rates and suppress outbursts, the architectural equivalent of a tranquilizer. The table was oval, polished to a high shine, and in the center sat a pitcher of water with 4 overturned glasses. I arrived exactly at 10 o'clock. I was wearing my best blazer, a dark navy wool that made me feel armored. Sarah had offered to drive me and wait in the car, but I had declined. This was a room I had to walk into alone. When I entered, they were already there. My mother, Caroline Ross, sat on the left side of the table. She had chosen her costume carefully. She was wearing a soft pastel cardigan and a scarf tied loosely around her neck, an outfit that suggested vulnerability, gentleness, the weary matriarch doing her best in difficult times. She looked up when I walked in, and her face arranged itself into a look of sorrowful welcome. "Eleanor," she said softly, "I saved you a seat." She patted the empty leather chair next to her. I didn't take it. Instead, I walked to the other side of the table, placing the width of the mahogany between us. "I will sit here," I said. My brother, Mark, was sitting next to Mom. He looked nauseous. His leg was bouncing under the table, a rapid-fire jitter that shook the water pitcher. He didn't look at me. He was staring at a notepad in front of him, drawing aggressive, dark circles with a ballpoint pen. At the head of the table sat Lydia Vance, the mediator. She was a woman in her 60s with keen, intelligent eyes and a stillness that commanded the room. To her right was Arthur Penhaligon, the estate attorney, looking as grave and mahogany-voiced as ever. To her left was a man I didn't recognize, the representative from Juniper Valley Community Bank. "Thank you all for coming," Ms. Vance said. Her voice was level, devoid of judgment. "We are here today to discuss the disposition of the Silas Ross Trust, specifically the sub-account activated by the deposit of check number 409. Mom let out a small, musical sigh. It was a sound designed to signal to everyone that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, a waste of time caused by a confused daughter. "Before we begin," Mom said, offering a warm, conspiratorial smile to Ms. Vance, "I just want to say how embarrassed I am that we are taking up your time with this. My father was eccentric in his final years, and Eleanor, bless her heart, has always been a bit literal. I am sure we can clear this up in 10 minutes. Ms. Vance didn't return the smile. She looked at Mom over the rim of her glasses. "Mrs. Ross, this is not a casual dispute resolution. This is a mandated disclosure triggered by a legal instrument. I ask that you refrain from characterizing the other parties until we have reviewed the documents." Mom's smile froze, then vanished. She adjusted her scarf. "Of course." Ms. Vance nodded to the bank representative. "Mr. Henderson?" Mr. Henderson opened a laptop. He was young, nervous, but precise. On January 21st, Eleanor Ross deposited a check for $20,000 into her personal account. The funds were drawn from the Ross Family Dormant Trust. As per the instructions on file dating back 12 years, the successful clearing of this check, without legal injunction, served as a master key. "A master key?" Mom asked, her voice sharpening. "It unlocked the transaction history." "Mr. Henderson said, "Up until that moment, the account was black-boxed. Statements were only visible to the grantor, Silas Ross. Even the account manager, you, Mrs. Ross, could only see the available balance and submit withdrawal requests. You could not see the historical ledger or the coding of the funds. That is ridiculous. Mom scoffed. I was the family manager. I saw statements every month. You saw summaries. Mr. Arthur Penhaligon corrected gently. He leaned forward. Your father was very specific. Caroline, he provided you with a sanitized view. He allowed you to request funds. But he kept the categorization of those funds hidden from you. He wanted to see how you would label your requests if you thought no one was checking the receipts. The room went quiet. The hum of the ventilation system seemed suddenly loud. What do you mean? Label my requests? Mom asked. Her voice had lost its soft, maternal timbre. Mr. Penhaligon slid a thick, spiral-bound packet across the table to me. He slid a second one to Mom. Eleanor, he said, this is the complete transaction history of the trust for the last 10 years. I opened the packet. It was the official version of the data I had seen in the binder, but detailed with bank codes and routing numbers. I turned the page. There they were, the reimbursements. I looked at the dates. I looked at the amounts. And then I looked at the column I hadn't seen before. The column labeled Beneficiary Justification. This was the text Mom had entered when she requested the money online. Date, August 12, 2014. Amount, $5,000. Justification, Eleanor Ross, urgent legal defense retainer, DUI charge. I stared at the words, DUI charge. I have never had a DUI. I said, my voice was calm, but my blood was freezing in my veins. I have never even had a speeding ticket. Mom, look at me. She refused to look. She was flipping through her own packet, her face pale. You told Grandpa I was arrested? I asked. You told him I needed $5,000 for a lawyer? Mom slammed the packet shut. It was a misunderstanding. I probably clicked the wrong drop-down menu. The software was archaic. Eleanor, you know how bad I am with computers. I turned the page. Date, November 3, 2016. Amount, $8,000. Justification, Eleanor Ross, rehab facility. Entrance fee. Rehab? I whispered. You told him I was in rehab? I was working at the logistics firm. I said, my voice rising. I was employee of the month in November 2016. I was at work every single day. Mom waved her hand dismissively. It was code. Eleanor, we used codes for privacy. Grandpa knew what it was really for. It was for general family support. We just had to put something in the box to get the wire to go through. General family support. Miss, Vance repeated. She looked at a document in her own file. Mrs. Ross, if it was general support, why are there transfer receipts showing these funds moved from the trust to your personal checking account, and then immediately to a travel agency called Luxury Escapes? Mom's mouth opened and closed. Ms. Vance continued, and regarding the rehab fee, that $8,000 was transferred to a contractor named Miller Renovations. Did they provide therapy, Mrs. Ross? Or did they build your deck? Mom stood up. This is an ambush. I am not going to sit here and be interrogated about how I managed this family's survival. My father trusted me. He knew I was the one keeping this family together while Eleanor was off playing at being independent. He knew. I said, I looked at the ledger. That is why he hid the records. He wanted proof. Sit down. Caroline, Mr. Penhaligon said. His voice was not loud, but it had the weight of an anvil. Mom sat. She looked at Mark. Mark, say something. Tell them how hard we had it. Mark didn't speak. He was staring at the open packet in front of him. He looked like a man who had just watched his house burn down. Mark? Mom prompted. He lifted his head. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. Elle, he said, look at page 14. I turned to page 14. Date, May 6, 2019. Amount, $15,000. Justification, Mark Ross bail bond and legal settlement. I looked at Mark. I thought you said it was gambling debts. It was, he said, his voice shaking. I owed the money to a bookie. But she put it down as bail? He looked at Mom. You told Grandpa I was in jail? Mom hissed at him. Mark, Shut up. It doesn't matter what I told him. He is dead. The money is spent. Why are we doing this? It matters because Sheila thinks I have a criminal record now, Mark shouted. He slammed his hand on the table. Grandpa sent me a letter 3 years ago, urging me to clean up my life and stay on the right side of the law. I thought he was just being a judgmental old man. But he thought I was a criminal. Because of you. I was protecting you, Mom screamed back. If I told him you gambled it away, he would have cut you off. I had to make it sound like an emergency. I had to make you look like victims so he would open his wallet. The room fell into a stunned silence. The admission hung in the air, vibrating. I had to make you look like victims. That was it. That was the architecture of our lives. She had monetized our failures, and when we didn't fail enough, she invented failures for us. I looked at Ms. Vance. The mediator was writing something down. Mrs. Ross, Ms. Vance said, "You just admitted to falsifying the justification for trust withdrawals. That is, by definition, fraud against the estate." Mom realized her mistake. She pulled back, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. "I was the family manager," she said, her voice dropping to a sullen whisper. "I had discretion. It was all one pot. We are family." Ms. Vance looked at me. "Ms. Ross, you had a question about the reimbursements?" "I did. I looked at the page again. There was one more thing. Date, July 10, 2017. Amount, $12,000. Justification, Eleanor Ross, psychiatric intervention." I felt the old shame flare up, hot and agonizing. Psychiatric intervention. That was the year I had broken up with my long-term boyfriend. I had been sad. I had cried. I had called Mom for support. And she had billed Grandpa $12,000 for my heartbreak. She had told him I was crazy. I looked at her. She was watching me, her eyes narrowing. "Don't look at me like that. Eleanor," she spat. "You were unstable that summer. You called me crying every night. You were hysterical. I was worried you were going to hurt yourself. I had to be ready to pay for a hospital. So you took the money." I said, "But you never sent me to a hospital. You never even suggested therapy. You just kept it. I kept it in reserve," she said, "in case you crashed. And don't act so high and mighty. You have always been the fragile one, the emotional one, the one we all have to tiptoe around. And now here you are, dragging us into this room, trying to ruin us because you are jealous." "Jealous?" I asked. "Jealous that I had a relationship with him, that I was the one he relied on. You were always on the outside, Eleanor, and you hated it. So now you are using this little check to punish me. It is childish. It is petty." I felt the tears prickling behind my eyes. It was her oldest weapon. "You are too sensitive. You are jealous." I took a deep breath. I let the air out slowly. I looked at the paper. I looked at the date, July 2017. "I am not jealous, Mom," I said quietly. "And I am not childish." I pointed to the entry. The money didn't go to a reserve account. It went to a dealership, Prestige Motors. I looked at her. "That is when you leased the Mercedes, isn't it?" The silence that followed was absolute. Mark made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You bought a car with her mental breakdown money?" Mark asked. Mom crossed her arms. "I needed reliable transportation to take care of you people." "Ms. Vance cleared her throat. "There is another matter," she said. She opened a separate file folder. It was thin and old. 5 years ago, a complaint was filed with the bank's internal ethics hotline. An anonymous tip suggested that the Ross Trust was being used for non-authorized expenses. Mom went rigid. The bank investigated. Ms. Vance continued. They contacted the family manager. You, Mrs. Ross, you provided a document to close the investigation. It was a signed affidavit from the beneficiaries, stating that all funds had been received and accounted for. She pulled out a sheet of paper. It was a photocopy. "Mark," Ms. Vance said, "is this your signature?" Mark leaned over. He squinted at the paper. "Yeah," he said, "that is my signature." "Do you remember signing this?" Mark rubbed his face. "I don't know. Mom brings me papers all the time. Tax stuff. Insurance stuff. She tells me to sign. I sign. I trust her. He looked at Mom. I trusted her. Ms. Vance turned to me. And Eleanor, is this your signature? I looked at the document. It was the same form I had found in my email, the one attached to the insurance update. It looks like my signature, I said, but I never signed an affidavit. I signed a blank form she sent me for insurance purposes. Ms. Vance nodded. We had our forensic team look at the digital scan this morning. The signature on this document was lifted from another source and digitally pasted onto this affidavit. You can see the pixelation halo if you zoom in. She looked at Mom. Mrs. Ross, this is forgery, and it is obstruction of a bank investigation. Mom stood up again. She gathered her purse. I am leaving, she said. I am not going to sit here and be accused of crimes by a calculator and a receptionist. She gestured at me. You did this, Eleanor. You broke this family. I hope the money keeps you warm at night. She turned to the door. Mrs. Ross. Mr. Penhaligon said. His voice stopped her with one hand on the handle. If you leave now, you will trigger the default clause. But before you go, you should know about the second distribution. Mom stopped. She turned around slowly. Second distribution? Mr. Penhaligon nodded. Silas Ross anticipated that the activation of the account might cause volatility. He also anticipated that someone might try to interfere with the beneficiary, you. Eleanor. He looked at his notes. Yesterday morning, a call was placed to my office impersonating Eleanor Ross. That call was traced to your cell phone number. Caroline. Mom paled. I was just trying to get information. That call, Mr. Penhaligon said, triggered the impersonation protocol. Your father's instructions were clear. If any family member attempts to impersonate the key holder to access the funds, the trust is to immediately liquidate all remaining assets and transfer them to a holding account for the sole benefit of the key holder. He looked at me. Eleanor, because your mother tried to be you yesterday, the remaining balance of the trust, all $340,000, has been moved to your name. It is no longer a family trust. It is yours. Mom dropped her purse. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. No, she whispered. That is everything. That is the maintenance money for the house. That is the tax money. It is Eleanor's money now. Mr. Penhaligon said. Mark looked at me. He looked at Mom. And then he started to laugh. It was a dry, broken sound. You played yourself. Mom, he said. You literally called the lawyer and handed Eleanor the whole pot. Mom looked at me. Her eyes were wide, panicked. She wasn't the matriarch anymore. She was a woman who had just realized she was destitute. Eleanor, she said, her voice trembling, you can't keep it. The house. The roof needs repairs. The taxes are due in April. If you keep that money, the house goes. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had billed my grandfather for my fictional rehab, for my fictional DUI, for my fictional insanity. Mr. Penhaligon looked at me. Mrs. Ross, you have a choice. The funds are yours. The evidence of fraud is clear. We can file a formal criminal complaint regarding the forgery and the wire fraud, or we can handle this civilly. We can keep it private. But the terms are up to you. The room waited. Mark held his breath. Mom stared at me, her hands shaking. I felt a surge of power, but it wasn't the kind I expected. It wasn't the thrill of victory. It was the heavy, solemn weight of judgment. I looked at the mediator. Ms. Vance, I asked, may I have a moment with you? Privately? Ms. Vance nodded. Of course. We stepped into a small, adjoining office. The door clicked shut, muffling the sound of the HVAC. I stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot. I saw my red Honda. I saw Mom's Mercedes, the one bought with my psychiatric intervention money. Ms. Ross? Ms. Vance asked gently. What do you want to do? I don't want to put her in prison. I said. Ms. Vance nodded. Most families don't. But I can't let her get away with it. I said, if I just take the money and walk away, she will spin a new story. She will tell everyone I stole the inheritance. She will tell Mark I tricked the lawyers. She will make herself the victim again. She paused. And she will find another way to use my name. The loan. The Sterling loan. I turned to Ms. Vance. I want the truth. I said, I want it in writing. I want a confession. Ms. Vance considered this. We can draft a settlement agreement. In exchange for you not pressing criminal charges, she signs a statement admitting to the misuse of funds and the forgery. Will it be legally binding? I asked. Yes. And if she breaks it? If she lies about me again? Then we file the criminal charges. Ms. Vance said, it gives you a permanent leverage. I nodded. That is what I want. But not just a statement. I want a forensic accounting. I want every debt she has opened in my name found and paid off with that money. Before she sees a dime for the house, before Mark sees a dime for his debts, I want my name scrubbed clean. I said, that is the price. Ms. Vance smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. A wise choice. We walked back into the conference room. Mom was sitting in her chair, weeping softly into a tissue. Mark was staring at the ceiling. Ms. Vance sat down. Eleanor has made a decision, she announced. Mom looked up, hope and fear warring in her face. Eleanor, I am not going to send you to jail. Mom, I said. She let out a sob of relief. Oh, thank God. Oh, Eleanor, thank you. I knew you were good. I knew. But I cut her off. My voice was hard. I am not signing your waiver, and I am not giving you the money. Her face fell. What? I am keeping the money in the trust, I said, and I am authorizing a full forensic audit of every financial document you have filed in the last 15 years. The room went deadly quiet. What? Mom whispered. I am hiring a forensic accountant. I said, they are going to find every loan, every credit card, every lien you have opened in my name. They are going to find the Sterling loan. They are going to find the utility bills. I leaned forward, and then I am going to use this money, my money, to pay them off. I am going to fix the credit you destroyed. I am going to pay the taxes you skipped, and whatever is left, if there is anything left, then maybe we talk about the roof. But until then, I said, you don't control the money. You don't control the narrative, and you certainly don't control me. Mom stared at me. Her face was a mask of horror. She realized what I was saying. I wasn't just taking the cash. I was taking the secrets. I was going to turn over every rock, and she was going to have to watch. You can't do that, she whispered. It will humiliate me. People will find out. I looked at the packet on the table, the packet that said I was a drunk, a criminal, a mental patient. I picked it up. You should have thought of that. I said, before you bought a Mercedes with my sanity. I looked at Mr. Penhaligon. Start the audit. The attorney nodded. Pen poised. With pleasure. Miss Ross. Mom put her head in her hands. Mark looked at me, and for the first time, there was no anger in his eyes, just fear and respect. I sat back in my chair. The room was silent, save for the scratching of Mr. Penhaligon's pen. The air felt cleaner. The beige walls didn't feel aggressive anymore. They felt like a blank canvas. I had the truth. Now, I just had to survive the fallout. The silence in the conference room was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a structure collapsing. I had just ordered a forensic audit of my own family, and the dust was choking us all. Mr. Penhaligon had his pen poised over the document, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He looked like a man who had waited 10 years to watch a specific domino fall. My mother, Caroline, was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard her knuckles were the color of old bone. She wasn't crying anymore. The shock of the money transfer, the $340,000 moving to my name, had burned away her tears, leaving something harder and more dangerous underneath. You cannot do this, Eleanor, she said. Her voice was low, trembling with a controlled outrage that I knew well. It was the voice she used when a waiter brought the wrong wine, or when a neighbor parked too close to her driveway. It was the voice of a woman who believed the world owed her compliance. I said, and I am. You are destroying this family, she hissed. She stood up, leaning over the table, her shadow stretching across the polished wood. You are burning down everything your grandfather built, everything I built. And for what? Spite? Because I didn't hold your hand enough when you were 20? She looked at Mark, trying to draft him into her army one last time. Mark, tell her she is ruining us. Mark didn't look up. He was staring at the table, his face gray. He knew what an audit would find. He knew exactly where the bail money had gone. I looked at my mother. I really looked at her. For years, I had seen her as a force of nature, a terrifying, competence-obsessed matriarch who found me wanting. But now, standing there in her pastel cardigan, shaking with rage because she had lost access to her slush fund, she looked small. I am not destroying the family. Mom, I said. My voice was calm, steady, anchored in the truth I had found in the storage unit. The family was destroyed the moment you decided I was a resource, not a daughter. She flinched, as if I had slapped her. We protected you, she shouted. We gave you a home. You gave me a role. I corrected. You gave me the role of the failure so you could play the role of the martyr. You used my name to hide your debts. You used my reputation to cover your mistakes. That isn't protection. Mom, that is cannibalism. I reached into my bag. There was one last thing I needed her to see. One last ghost I needed to bring into the room. I pulled out the photocopy of Grandpa's ledger, the page I had flagged in the storage unit. Mr. Penhaligon, I said, could you please read the entry dated October 4th, 2019? The attorney took the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat. Entry date, October 4th, 2019. He read, Caroline was here today. She was complaining about Eleanor's instability again. She asked for an advance on the trust to cover potential legal issues she claims Eleanor is facing. I know Eleanor is fine. I spoke to her yesterday. She is working hard. He paused, glancing at Mom. I realized today that Caroline needs Eleanor to be broken. It is the only way she can justify the money she bleeds from the estate. I have written the check, the 20,000 key, and put it in the safe. I have given Eleanor the instructions. I know that when she tries to cash it, Caroline will call it a fake. She will call Eleanor crazy. She will try to stop it. That will be the final test. If Caroline tries to block the check, it means she cares more about the lie than she does about her own father's wishes. And if that happens, the silo opens. Mr. Penhaligon lowered the paper. He knew. I said to her, he didn't just suspect you were stealing. He knew you were lying about me, and he knew exactly what you would say at the funeral. It is a prop. Don't embarrass yourself. He predicted every word. Mom stared at the paper in the lawyer's hand. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the ghost of the man she thought she had outsmarted. She realized, in that moment, that for the last 4 years of his life, while she was bringing him soup and asking for signatures, he was watching her with clear, disappointed eyes. He outmaneuvered you, I said, years ago. She sat down heavily. The fight went out of her shoulders. She looked old. Ms. Vance, the mediator, leaned forward. Her tone was gentle but firm, the voice of someone steering a ship away from the rocks. Ms. Ross, she said to me, the audit is in motion. The funds are secured in your name. We have established the fraudulent nature of the prior withdrawals. The question now is, what is your desired outcome? She gestured to the papers on the table. We can proceed to a criminal referral, or, as we discussed, we can look for a resolution that corrects the record without incarceration. I looked at the bank representative. Mr. Henderson. He was typing rapidly on his laptop. I don't want the money just to have the money. I said, I want corrections. Corrections? Mr. Henderson asked. I want my name removed from every obligation my mother created. I said, I want a formal letter from the bank acknowledging that the reimbursements for rehab, DUIS, and psychiatric care were fraudulent and unsubstantiated. I want that letter in my permanent file. Mr. Henderson nodded. We can do that. We will issue a notice of error for each transaction, and, I continued, turning to Mom, I know about Sterling. Mom's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide with genuine terror. I know you borrowed $50,000 from Victor Sterling. I said, and I know you signed my name as the guarantor. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The ledger had been too accurate. I want that debt paid. I said, today, using the funds from the trust. I want a receipt from Sterling marking the loan as satisfied in full, and I want the original promissory note with my forged signature returned to me so I can burn it. But, Mom stammered, if you pay Sterling off, that takes $50,000 out of the pot. That is less for us. There is no us, Mom. I said, there is the money you stole, and the money I am using to fix what you broke. I looked at Mr. Penhaligon. Pay Sterling, I said, and pay the back taxes on the house, and pay off the credit card she opened in my name in 2018. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. Miss Ross, I should note, if we proceed with the deep forensic audit to find all these liabilities, we are required to interview counterparties. That means we will be contacting the vendors, the travel agency, the contractor who remodeled the bathroom, Mr. Sterling. He looked at Mom. If Mrs. Ball, Ross used her standing in the community to facilitate these transactions, perhaps by telling friends that she was managing her troubled daughter's finances, those conversations will happen. We will have to ask them why they accepted a signature that didn't match yours. Mom went white. You can't do that, she whispered. The contractor. That is Jerry Miller. He is on the zoning board with me. If you tell him I committed fraud, then tell the truth. I said. She looked at me, pleading. Eleanor, please. Jerry is a friend. If this gets out, I won't be able to show my face at the club. I will be ruined. I felt a cold lack of sympathy. She wasn't worried about jail. She was worried about the zoning board. She was worried about her brunch circle. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you told Jerry Miller I was in rehab so you could get a new deck. I said, Ms. Ross, Mr. Henderson said to me, it is a standard part of the fraud review. We can't verify the debt without contacting the creditor. Do it. I said. Mom let out a sound like a wounded animal. She buried her face in her hands. Mark spoke up then. His voice was raspy. Please. I turned to him. I get it, he said. I get why you are doing this to her. She deserves it. But Sheila, he looked at me with desperate, red-rimmed eyes. If the bank starts calling around if they send letters to the house about gambling debt settlements. Sheila opens the mail. She will see it. I looked at my brother. He was asking for the same protection he had always asked for. Hide my mess. Be the shock absorber. I can't stop the mail. Mark, I said. The bank has to validate the transactions. You can stop the detailed descriptions, he begged. You can ask them to just list it as miscellaneous error, please. If she finds out I lied about the bail money, if she finds out I have been lying for 5 years. I looked at him. I remembered the coffee shop. I remembered him telling me to split the money to keep the peace. I won't shame you publicly. Mark, I said, I won't post it on Facebook. I won't call Sheila and tell her. He exhaled, his shoulders sagging in relief. Thank you. Thank you. But, I added, my voice hardening, I am not going to lie for you either. When that letter comes to your house, and Sheila asks what it is you are going to tell her. He froze. You have to tell her the truth. Mark, all of it. The gambling, the bail story, the fact that you let Mom frame me to cover your tracks. I can't, he whispered. She will leave me. If you don't tell her, I said, then you are building your marriage on the same rot that Mom built this family on, and I won't be a party to it anymore. I am not your alibi. He stared at me. He looked terrified, but for the first time, He looked like a man who was facing his own life, rather than hiding behind his sister's skirt. "That is the deal," I said. "I clean up the financial mess. You clean up the moral one." He nodded slowly. Okay, Ms. Vance tapped her pen on the table. "We have a plan for the audit. We have a plan for the debt repayment. But there is one final matter. Mr. Penhaligon opened the last section of his binder. "The release clause," he said. He looked at me. "Eleanor, your grandfather left one final instruction. He knew that if we reached this stage, if the account was unlocked, the fraud revealed, and the money transferred to you, you would face a difficult position. He knew that possessing this money might make you a target for continued manipulation. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. He gave you a choice regarding the final disposition of the assets." I looked at the paper. It was titled Distribution Election. Option A, personal distribution. The beneficiary, Eleanor Ross, retains all remaining funds, post-audit and debt satisfaction, for her personal use. The account is closed. Option B, the Briar Glen Community Grant. The beneficiary, Eleanor Ross, authorizes the immediate transfer of all remaining funds to establish a permanent scholarship fund for local students entering trade schools. The fund will be named the Silas Ross Truth in Labor Grant. The family will have no access to or control over these funds. I stared at the options. If I took option A, I would walk away with nearly $250,000. I could buy a house. I could pay off my student loans. I could travel. It was life-changing money. But as long as I had that money, Mom would know it was there. She would know I had her inheritance. Every birthday, every Christmas, every time her roof leaked. She would look at me with that mix of guilt and entitlement. I would become the new bank. I would become the new grandpa, the person she had to manipulate to survive. If I took option A, the dynamic didn't change. It just reversed. I would hold the power, and they would resent me for it. I looked at option B. If I gave it away, it was gone. The roof money, the gambling money, the Mercedes money, all of it, gone to send kids to welding school. It would be a scorch mark on the earth where our inheritance used to be. Mom was watching me, reading the document upside down. Her eyes went wide. "Eleanor," she breathed. "You wouldn't—" I looked at her. "You wouldn't give it away to strangers," she said, her voice rising in panic. "That is Grandpa's money. That is our legacy." "Is it?" I asked. "I thought our legacy was fraud." "Eleanor, be reasonable." She reached out, her hand hovering over my arm. "You can't just burn $300,000. Think of what we could do with that. We could fix the house. We could—" "We?" I asked. She stopped. "There is no we. Mom, you made sure of that when you forged my signature." I looked at the paper again. Silas Ross. Truth in Labor Grant. Grandpa had worked in a hardware store. He valued work. He valued earnings. He hated handouts. He hated shortcuts. He had set this up. He knew that if I took the money, I would be trapped. He had given me an escape hatch, a way to detonate the trap. If I chose option B, I wasn't just giving away money, I was cutting the cord. I was ending the cycle. If there was no money, there was no reason for them to lie to me, to use me, or to pretend to love me. If there was no money, all that would be left was the truth. I looked at Mr. Penhaligon. "If I choose option B," I asked, "does the audit still happen? Do the debts still get paid?" "Yes," he said. "The debts are settled first as liabilities of the estate. The grant is funded with the remaining balance, so the sterling loan gets paid." I clarified. "My name gets cleared, and then the rest goes to the scholarship." "Correct." I turned the page. I looked at Mom. She was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Eleanor, please, don't leave us with nothing." "I am not leaving you with nothing. Mom," I said gently, "I am leaving you with the house. I am leaving you with your freedom. I am paying off the loan shark you borrowed from." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt a total, peaceful detachment. I realized that her love had always been a transaction. She loved me when I was useful. She loved me when I was a tax write-off. She loved me when I was a scapegoat. I was done auditioning for a part I never wanted. I am choosing what is right. I said, not what buys peace. I signed my name next to option B. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. Mom gasped, a strangled, choking sound. She slumped back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. It is gone, she whispered. It is all gone, mister. Penhaligon took the paper. He looked at it, and then he looked at me. His eyes were warm. Silas would have been very proud. Ms. Ross. I stood up. I felt light. I felt weightless. I gathered my purse. I gathered the folder with the audit confirmation. I walked to the door. Mark was sitting with his head in his hands. But he wasn't protesting. He knew he had gotten off easy. He had a hard conversation waiting for him at home. But he didn't have a fraud conviction. Mom was still staring at the ceiling. She didn't look at me as I opened the door. Goodbye. Mom, I said. She didn't answer. She was already calculating. I imagined, already thinking of how to spin this to the neighbors. Eleanor gave it all to charity. She is so impulsive, so idealistic. Let her spin it. I had the ledger. I had the letters from the bank. I had the truth. I walked out of the mediation center and into the parking lot. The sun was blindingly bright. The air smelled of asphalt and pine needles. I walked to my red Honda. It was old. It had a dent in the fender. It was mine. I sat in the driver's seat and put the key in the ignition. I didn't turn it immediately. I sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet. I had walked into the bank expecting to bounce a check. I had walked out with my life back. Grandpa had left me a key, and I had used it. I had unlocked the door, walked through the fire, and come out the other side. I was Eleanor Ross. I was 33 years old. I had $0 in inheritance, and I was the richest woman in Briar Glen. I turned the key. The engine caught. I pulled out onto the road, driving away from the house on the hill, driving toward a future that, finally, belonged only to me. Thank you so much for listening to Don't Embarrass Yourself with That Prop. Mom said Grandpa's $20,000 check was fake, so I deposited it. This story was a journey into the hidden costs of family secrets and the price of reclaiming your own identity. I'd love to know what you would have done in Eleanor's shoes. Would you have chosen the money, or would you have chosen the grant? And where are you listening from today? Please drop a comment below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. We have many more tales of justice, boundaries, and turning the tables coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply telling the truth.